Handwriting can provide a very clear window into our health, as using any tool for writing is a demanding process for our brains, eyes and hands. This documentary will explore the combined use of historical research and cutting-edge technology to answer the question, how can investigating handwriting help diagnose and enhance the lives of people with debilitating movement disorders? Dr. Jane Alty is a consultant neurologist specialising in movement disorders, including tremor conditions.
A tremor, by definition, is a regular oscillatory movement. The front part of the brain sends signals down through the spinal cord, through the nerves and into the muscles of the hand to enable the hand to move. And as the hand is moving, it's sending signals back into the brain to tell the brain effectively where that hand is in space, what position the fingers are in. The problem with any physical assessment that I do in clinic is it's purely a snapshot. So I'm seeing them for 1 or 2 minutes or 15 minutes of an assessment, whereas how that tremor manifests at home on a day-to-day basis might be different. I think if we had some kind of tool that allows us to monitor tremor over a longer period on a day-to-day basis, that would be an enormous advancement, really.
Taking on the challenge to investigate further is a multidisciplinary team of historians and scientists. They have all come together to combine their expertise. Dr. Stephen Smith, an electronic engineer, is part of this team.
My work has always been applying computers to problems in healthcare, and specifically the analysis of movements from patients with neurodegenerative conditions such as Parkinson's disease. So there's a symptom of tremor, which most people are familiar with, but there are other symptoms such as bradykinesia, which is a slowing of movement, which is very indicative of Parkinson's disease. And then there's a freezing as well. There are 2 main problems that we're trying to solve. The first is confirming diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. It can be difficult in the early months to enable this to be done, and so an objective measurement really will help specialists achieve a confirmed diagnosis.
Professor Jim Austin has been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and faces the challenges of living with this condition on a daily basis.
I'm Jim Austin. I'm a Professor of Neurocomputation at the University of York. I'm also the CEO and founder of a small company, Cybula Limited. And I'm also the curator of the computer sheds. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease about six years ago, something like that. So I found a specialist in York and he said, well, you've either got Parkinson's or you've got brain cancer. So I did a couple of tests which check out whether a part of the brain is working called the substantia nigra. Basically he came back and said, well, I've got the good news or the bad news. The good news is you haven't got brain cancer. The bad news is you've got Parkinson's. So the biggest pain is my left arm. And today you can see it's quite wobbly. I'm on one drug at the moment. I've got to the end of that drug and I should be changing onto the new drug. It varies by the day. If I'm in the early morning, I'm fine. I can write just normally. And then later on, it gets worse and worse and worse. Early Parkinson's is affecting one side or the other. I'm lucky to only have it affected on the left. And one of the things that I find useful is called computers. But one of the difficulties with computers is it requires you to use 2 hands, typically with a keyboard. A pen only requires 1 hand. So the left-hand side is quite tricky. The right-hand side, perfect. One of the tests of Parkinson's is quite interesting. You basically tap your finger like that. And so I can tap that for ages and ages and ages. And on the other side, even early on in Parkinson's, I can hardly do it. That's as much as I can do. There are 2 ways that you command yourself to do things. One is where you think about everything. So if I'm going to pick something up, I think about it very carefully and go there and work out how to do it. The other one is just basically what I call a ballistic movement, which is you just do it. You just like when you're playing golf, you just go whoosh, straight through. You don't think about it. So if you have to think about doing something, it becomes very difficult. There's lots of tasks like that, but if it's a known task, so for example, if for swimming or if you're walking fast or whatever like that, it's very easy.
Tremulous disorders are not just modern conditions. We can see evidence of them from the Middle Ages, a time when handwriting was used as the primary means of making records.
What's really exciting now is that from what we're learning about analysing the movements of patients today, is that we can go back and look at the writing of medieval scribes and analyse it in a similar way, with the idea of can we apply what we've learnt today and apply it to those scribes in the past? Can we get an indication of the type of condition that the scribes have had?
Historian Dr. Deborah Thorp has taken on the challenge of looking for signs of medical disorders in medieval handwriting. Fortunately for Dr. Thorp and her research team, a wealth of original medieval handwriting has survived to the modern day.
As a medieval paleographer or someone who studies historical handwriting, it was really refreshing to get to apply my skills in a more practical context, and also in a context that brings them right up until the modern day. So investigating the impact of neurological disorders on handwriting relates really well to the conditions that are affecting us today as a society, such as the onset of Parkinson's disease and different types of dementia. And you can see this connection between the medieval past and the modern day. So I decided to team up with consultant neurologist Dr. Jane Alty to have a look at how we could learn a bit more about how medieval scribes fared as they got older and with the onset of these different conditions.
Handwriting can tell us a lot about movement disorders. Many people will have old letters, old diaries, old postcards, so we can see how somebody's handwriting used to be in younger years and also how it's changed now. We know that certain tremor conditions have what we call an axis to the tremor. So if you imagine a letter O, for example, and we project that onto a clock face, we know that essential tremor, typically, the tremor will be intruding at where 2 o'clock would be and 8 o'clock would be, for example, in a right-handed person. Whereas if you're left-handed, it's 90 degrees reversed. So it would be, say, 11 o'clock and 5 o'clock, for example. So if you begin to look at where the tremor is within the letters, you can start to get many clues about what the movement disorder might be.
One scribe that particularly stands out within surviving medieval texts is a monk known today only as the Tremulous Hand of Worcester. Analysis suggests that he had a neurological condition that created a pattern of distortions in his handwriting.
The Tremulous Hand of Worcester was well known for adding annotations to older Anglo-Saxon manuscripts, so he very rarely wrote long chunks of handwriting himself. But this manuscript here at Worcester Cathedral is one of those rare examples of where he was writing for long stints of time. So we can see how the handwriting varied over the course of a working day, periods where it got worse and periods where it got better. So I came along here to Worcester to have a look at the manuscript in person and also to experience the Tremulous Hand's writing in the place that he wrote this manuscript here at Worcester Cathedral. So we investigated the handwriting and picked out some of the features that were most distinctive in his distinctive tremulous handwriting that gives him the name the Tremulous Hand of Worcester. So we noticed that the tremor had a very fine amplitude, so it didn't deviate an awful lot from the central line, especially in tall strokes such as L's and B's. And this was very characteristic of a condition called essential tremor, which is really common amongst modern populations.
Calligraphers specialise in historical writing practices. They have a unique hands-on perspective of the physical and mental trials and tribulations of writing like a medieval scribe.
It is a job of work. You have to get your work done. You are working as part of a team. You're given the materials. You're given the tools to a certain extent. Your work is anonymous. Simply you are part of that team.
The research team has combined paleography with the practical insight of modern calligraphers to uncover a greater understanding of the hard lives of medieval scribes.
We know that scribes experienced a range of health problems and really hard working conditions as they went about their daily work. We know that they experienced eye problems and some scribes needed to wear eyeglasses. We know that their desks that they worked on were very uncomfortable and they had to sit in these positions for long periods of time.
So, could the working conditions of the time have also had an effect on the quality of the handwriting? Calligrapher Michael Gulick explains his thoughts on what external factors would have affected the quality of the scribe's writing.
Medieval scribes, of course, they were limited to some degree about when and how they could work. In the summer, for example, the weather hopefully would be fine, and the sun would be up and the light would be good. There wasn't very much artificial light, and artificial light, like candles, was very expensive in the medieval period. So long hours in the summer and the warm weather would have meant a much longer working day than in the winter, when the day was shorter and the weather was colder, and cold weather makes for cold fingers, and cold fingers makes for a stiff body and makes for hard writing. Now, there's nothing worse for a medieval scribe than feeling cold. Very important that the blood is circulating, because you're sitting down and not moving. You're not generating lots of warmth in your body by running around. You're sitting basically rather still, and therefore it's quite important that the room in which you're working is warm and keeps your fingers flexible.
Not only the working conditions, but also the writing tools and materials may have also had an effect.
Using a quill is, for me particularly, is much better than a metal pen. When I'm using a metal pen, for some reason I always tend to grip it hard and pressure onto the paper or the vellum. But when I'm using a quill, it's such a light, sensitive tool that I don't grip it. And that made a lot of difference to my hands over a period of time. Anybody who's working with a tremor has to find their own way of either controlling that tremor, or if they don't want to do that, then accepting that that tremor is there and embracing that and acknowledging it. If you're working with a tool, say a quill, and you're writing, it becomes easier to control the tremor if you make smaller strokes, because it's much easier to make a small stroke without wobbling than it is a larger stroke.
What pen you use has a massive effect on the way you write anyway. And so selecting the pen, the style of pen, is quite important.
There are a group of people with tremor that notice if they have a different shaped pen or a different sized pen, that their writing can improve. So it might be somehow you've changed the sensory input to the hand, which is then slightly altering the output from the brain to improve that motor function. And we do know that people with dystonic tremor can improve greatly by having certain grips put onto pens or cutlery or cups and so on. I will often refer them to an occupational therapist, and they'll go through a range of different grips to see which one improves the condition most for that individual.
There's a guy who reckons that a triangular pen, he thinks that's better for Parkinson's for some reason, the way you actually hold the pen. It's quite important. I do notice it is a little bit better, but I haven't done any objective studies really.
My teacher had a tremor, and she resolved it by supporting her writing hand with her left hand to still the tremor. So there are ways in which that can be helped, and she was aware of that. And I think what she was trying to do was to eliminate the tremor.
One of the knacks of good writing is to be able to relax into the writing that you're doing. So a certain amount of mental and physical control is quite important. If you are too focused and if you're too intent on what you're doing, you then start to tense. And once you start to tense, then your muscle tone goes wrong and your body goes wrong.
It's clear from the evidence that there are many factors to take into consideration when researching medieval handwriting and potential tremulous conditions. But of course, we can also gain a deep insight and appreciation of the challenges from people currently living with these disorders.
So it's interesting to see if Parkinson's affects ancient scribes' writing, and here we've got an example of a scribe sitting at a desk. Of course, the scribes wouldn't have been under medication, and actually most people are under medication for Parkinson's, so we don't actually know personally what it's like not to have the medication. It's fantastic, the drugs. I mean, they're still not absolutely brilliant, but they really do a good job. So who knows what these guys would have had to put up with. There's no doubt that different days would have affected them in different ways.
Another scholar called Christine Franson had noticed this scribe's tremor became significantly relieved at one point, and she hypothesised that it was probably because he went away and had a rest. An essential tremor has been shown to improve with rests and get worse at periods of stress or hard work. And so we do think that he went away and had a rest, but it's also quite likely that he had a drink of alcohol.
There are certain types of tremor that respond exquisitely well to a small amount of alcohol. So, for example, there's a condition called essential tremor, which causes a fine amplitude, high-frequency tremor of the hands, usually. And a small amount of alcohol, so that might be a small glass of wine or half a pint of beer, can almost completely get rid of this tremor for as long as the alcohol's in the system. And then as it wears off, the tremor comes back. But most other tremor conditions, such as Parkinson's disease, dystonic tremor, they tend to have no response at all to alcohol, or actually the tremor gets a little bit worse. So actually how somebody responds to alcohol can be very helpful in diagnosing what kind of tremor they have.
We also noticed that there weren't any cognitive impairments evident in the handwriting, which points away from conditions like Parkinson's disease. We noticed that the tremor in general got worse as he progressed in his career. The deviations away from this central line became more pronounced. And also some of the other characteristics changed as well, like the handwriting got slightly bigger. This all pointed towards a general deterioration in his handwriting abilities as he got older. So we've got a new case study of a scribe named Bernard Blancard, who was a scribe working in medieval Marseille, and his handwriting shows very different characteristics from the Tremulous hand of Worcester, more suggestive of a different condition, such as dystonia, whereas the Tremulous hand of Worcester's writing has this very consistent pressure on the quill. Bernard Blancard, his handwriting is more inconsistent, so there's this kind of pressure that he was exerting on the page as he was writing, which is less suggestive of essential tremor and more suggestive of dystonia. So we're hoping that as we continue this research, we'll have more examples of medieval scribes that were experiencing problems with the handwriting process that was interfering with the processes of writing and causing them difficulties in their careers.
Taking all their findings into account, the team can progress in researching into digitizing pen technology and evolutionary algorithms to shed more light on movement disorders and how a link can be created between the past, present, and future.
The really important aspect of the work that we're doing here is in the development of the computer algorithms. Unlike conventional computer algorithms, which are told step by step what to do, evolutionary algorithms, so-called because they're inspired by Darwinian evolution, are randomly initialized. So rather than actually telling the computer what to do step by step, the computer learns the difference between those movements associated with the condition of Parkinson's disease and those movements associated with every normal activity in daily life. So when we measure the writing of a patient, we use a digitizing pen, such as this one here, and this enables us to look at all the small variations in the writing process, which are pretty much imperceptible to the human eye. So there'd be small hesitations, differences in speed, and an overall profile or picture of the way somebody uses a pen to write or draw. What we aim to do is to really take this analysis and use it with the type of implements a medieval scribe would have used. So instead of using this pen, we can use a quill such as this, but in the same way we'll be able to capture the way in which the quill is used in writing.
People such as the Tremulous hand of Worcester may have been lost to history with no evidence of neurological disorders in their skeletons, but through their handwriting, evidence of how their conditions affected their day-to-day lives has been preserved. By working as part of a multidisciplinary team, today's neurology and electronic engineering experts are not only helping historians to shed light on medieval conditions, but have begun to create links between the past and the present to inform future research of tremulous diseases and disorders. It's hoped that the technology they're developing, which reveals even more about the finest bodily movements behind handwriting distortions, might give us ever greater insight into the medical disorders of the past, and, in turn, that this analysis will be used to help people living with tremulous conditions now and into the future. The research is already being developed into publications and covered in the media, and is providing the basis for future research that combines the knowledge of scholars of modern medicine with those of medieval history. Ultimately, this research will go a long way in helping medical professionals better understand neurological conditions, provide people with an earlier diagnosis, and improve their quality of life.